Thank you to Rebel Girls for allowing Read to a Child volunteers to read selected stories from Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, 100 Immigrant Women Who Changed the World, written by Elena Favilli and illustrated by 70 extraordinary female artists from 29 countries. La, 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 la. La, 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 la.
ELISA ROJAS, a lawyer. When a girl named Elisa was born, the doctors were worried. Something was different about this baby, they said. Her body was shaped differently. Some of her bones broke at birth. Her parents did not care. When they looked in Elisa's eyes, all they saw was a smart and spirited girl looking back at them. Elisa was born with a genetic condition that made her bones break easily. She would always need to use a wheelchair to get around. But Elisa was bright and curious and did not see why that should stop her from chasing her dreams. Her parents didn't either. The family moved from Chile to a new home in France so Elisa could have better opportunities, not just for her medical care, but for her brilliant mind too.
Elisa excelled in school and decided to become a lawyer. She passed her exams, but it took 18 months to find a law firm willing to hire a woman who used a wheelchair. Elisa was a great lawyer, but practicing law wasn't always easy. She often arrived at the courthouses to represent her clients, to find that she was not able to get into the building. Elisa was furious. She had the right to access those places just as much as any other person in France. Her disability wasn't the problem. The problem was people's refusal to treat her as an equal. Elisa helped form a group that fought to make laws fair for people with disabilities. She is still fighting today. Born April 30th, 1979, Chile to France, we want simple respect for our rights. Elisa Rojas.
La, 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 la.
Carolina Guerrero, journalist and producer. Once, there was a girl named Carolina who always wanted to learn something new. In Colombia, where she grew up, she taught people how to scuba dive. When she moved to New York City, she became an art dealer and designer. Later, she organized workshops, art shows, and cultural festivals all over North and South America. The world was so rich and full, Carolina thought. How could anyone limit themselves to just one place, one language, one culture? In her new home in New York City, Carolina loved to listen to radio programs that told deep, important stories about things she would otherwise never have known about. But these programs were only in English. What about people like herself who spoke Spanish? Why wasn't there a place where they could tell their stories in their own language?
Carolina decided to start a podcast of her own. Radio Ambulante will be a storytelling podcast by and for Spanish speakers. Once a week, the podcast would introduce listeners to firefighters in Peru or punk rockers in Mexico, astronomers in Argentina, or soccer stars in Brazil. Carolina became the CEO, the person responsible for making sure Radio Ambulante grew and thrived as a business. The first show was shared in 2011, and today, millions of people around the world listen in every week. With Radio Ambulante, Carolina brings people together through the power of storytelling.
La, 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 la.
Anne Wafula Strike, Paralympian. One day in Kenya, a 2-year-old girl named Anne became very, very sick. Her worried parents took her to a hospital where doctors wrapped her in a stiff plaster that made it impossible to move. When Anne got better, she could no longer walk. She had contracted polio and was paralyzed from the waist down. Many people in Anne's village did not understand what polio was. The local healer said she was a victim of evil magic. Her neighbors called her Snake because she had to crawl everywhere to get around. Her body worked differently now, but Anne refused to stop moving. She learned to use crutches, and her father found a special school that taught children with disabilities. Anne excelled at school. She became the first person in her family to go to university.
Later, when Anne was working as a teacher in Kenya, she fell in love with a fellow teacher named Norman. They decided to get married and move to Essex, England, where Norman was from. One day, while exercising at her local track, a coach noticed Anne circling the track in her wheelchair and asked if she had ever tried competitive racing. It turned out that Anne was fast, very fast. 2 years later, in Athens, Anne became the first wheelchair racer from East Africa to compete in the Paralympic Games. In 2006, Anne became a British citizen. The next year, she won a bronze medal at the Paralympic World Cup before a cheering crowd as an athlete competing for her new home, Great Britain.
Daniela SOTO-INNES, chef. Once there was a girl who believed that food should bring people joy. It was a lesson she learned in her family's kitchen in Mexico. Daniela spent her childhood helping her grandmother in her bakery and learning recipes from her mother. "I knew it was the thing that made me the happiest," she said. When Daniela was 12 years old, her family moved from Mexico City to Texas. 2 years later, she got her first restaurant job and attended culinary school soon after. But when Daniela started working in restaurants, she was disappointed by what she saw. Kitchens were not joyful places, the staff worked long hours, and the chefs were harsh bosses. Daniela decided that if she ever ran a restaurant, she would do things differently. She didn't have to wait long. Her career as a chef started in Mexico City, and when Daniela was just 24, she was asked to lead a Mexican-inspired restaurant in New York City. The restaurant became a huge success, and it allowed Daniela to combine both her Latin American and American roots in experimental ways. In 2016, Daniela won the James Beard Award for Rising Star Chef. Eventually, she opened another restaurant and has won even more awards. To Daniela, her greatest success is the community she's created and a staff that feels like family. Her kitchens are always full of laughter, dancing, and singing, just like in the kitchen of her childhood. Born August 26, 1990, Mexico to United States of America.
Eileen Gray, architect and furniture designer. Once there was a girl named Eileen who left Ireland to study drawing at a famous London art school. As she wandered the streets one day, she ducked into a shop where craftspeople were repairing old lacquer screens. Seeing her excitement, they eventually invited her to help out. And so, Eileen traded her drawing pencils for tools when she discovered a new passion, furniture design. A few years later, Eileen moved to Paris to study art and learn from Japanese lacquer master Saizo Sugawara. The two artists opened a workshop together, and people began to buy Eileen's unique and eye-catching furniture. She loved to experiment with unexpected materials like glass, chrome, and steel tubes, and challenge old design methods. Eileen eventually opened her own gallery where she sold her furniture, light fixtures, and hand-woven carpets. Over time, Eileen's interests changed from furniture design to modern architecture. She read architecture books, took drafting lessons, and joined architects at their building sites. She also drew plans of her own. Eileen's first and most famous building was a villa she called E1027. The house was white and rectangular like a row of sugar cubes and was perched on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. It was filled with Eileen's modern furniture. Eileen continued to work and create until she died at age 98. By then, she had gained the reputation as a pioneer in the modern design movement. Eileen was born August 9, 1878, and she moved from Ireland to London in France. To create, one must first question everything. Eileen Gray.
Elizabeth NYAMAYARO, political scientist. Once upon a time, there was a girl who dreamed about working for the United Nations. Elizabeth was 8 years old when a terrible famine happened in Zimbabwe, but one day, help arrived. A young woman in a blue uniform came to her village and handed out food. She told Elizabeth, "As Africans, we must all uplift each other." The woman worked for the United Nations, an organization that encourages countries to work together to solve problems and help people. After a second famine struck, Elizabeth was sent to live in Harare, Zimbabwe's capital, with an aunt she'd never met. At 10 years old, Elizabeth started attending school, where she experienced inequality and prejudice for the first time. Because she couldn't speak English and was behind in reading and writing, her classmates looked down on her. It was a difficult experience, but it also made Elizabeth more determined to help others who were mistreated. Elizabeth later left Zimbabwe to study political science in London. After graduation, her childhood dream came true. She got a job at the United Nations. As a senior director there, Elizabeth helped launch an important worldwide movement for gender equality called He for She. The movement encouraged men and women to work together to speak out against stereotypes and discrimination. Elizabeth made a home for herself in New York, but dreams of returning to Africa one day. She even started a nonprofit to help people there. "Africa has given me so much and made me who I am," Elizabeth said. "I want to be a part of the solution."
Daphne Kohler, computer scientist and entrepreneur. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Daphne who loved to learn. She loved math and computers and started programming when she was 12 years old. When she was a young teenager, Daphne told her parents she was bored in high school. She wanted to go to college instead. Daphne was only 17 years old when she graduated from university in Israel. Soon after, she decided to move to the United States to get her PhD. Daphne arrived on July 4th, 1989. It was Independence Day in the US. A good day. She decided to start a life in her new country.
By studying artificial intelligence and centuries-old ideas about decision-making, Daphne found new ways to teach computers to make predictions. Her research helped doctors figure out how cancer spreads, how to prevent illness in premature babies, and other life-saving work. Because of her own experiences in school, Daphne also knew the importance of a flexible education. She wanted to connect students with the knowledge they craved, even if they didn't have money or means to get to a classroom. With her business partner, Daphne started Coursera, a company that would allow people all over the world to take university classes online. Since then, Daphne has been elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and named one of the world's most influential people by Time magazine.
Elena Bardi, architect. Once there was a girl who loved to draw houses, but she didn't want her drawings to stay on paper. She wanted to bring them to life. When Elena Bo, known as Lena, told her father she wanted to be an architect, he was doubtful. Very few women chose architecture as a career. But Lena went to architecture school anyway. Lena opened her own architecture studio in Milan when she was 28. With World War II thundering through Europe, business was slow. Later, her studio was destroyed by bombs and never rebuilt. Eventually, Lena left Italy with her new husband, an art critic named Pietro Maria Bardi. In 1947, Pietro was asked to establish an art museum in Sao Paulo, Brazil. After they arrived in South America, Lena reopened her studio and designed one of her first Brazilian projects, their house. Lena called it Casa de Vidro, or glass house. It looked like a greenhouse hanging in the rainforest canopy. Casa de Vidro was good practice for Lena's next big project, designing the new home of the Sao Paulo Art Museum. The Musée de Arte de Sao Paulo is also a modern building. It looks like a glass box suspended above the ground and is considered to be one of Lena's most important works. Perhaps because she was a foreign-born woman, Lena's architecture skill was often overshadowed by Brazilian-born men. But today, many consider Lena to be one of the best and most overlooked architects of the 21st century. Lena was born on December 5, 1914 in Italy, and eventually moved to Brazil. Lena Bobardi says, "I am curious, and this quality broadens my horizons."
EMILIE SNETHLAGE, an ornithologist. When EMILIE attended the University of Berlin for the first time around age 30, she was an eager student. She wanted to study natural history. Despite being a bright student, EMILIE unfortunately was also an invisible one. Women weren't allowed to officially enroll in college yet in Germany, so EMILIE had to sit behind a screen when she attended class. Despite this unfair treatment, EMILIE earned her doctorate in 1904 and began her career as a zoological assistant at the Berlin Natural History Museum. But a bigger adventure was waiting. In 1905, EMILIE was hired to be a zoological assistant at Museu Perense Emilio Guelgi, a museum and research institution in Belém, Brazil. When she boarded the boat for her journey, it was the first time she had traveled so far outside her own country. From then on, Brazil was EMILIE's home. Part scientist, part explorer, she had studied the animals of the Amazon, and she trekked to remote parts of the rainforest to collect specimens. EMILIE became best known for her work as an ornithologist, a scientist who studies birds. In 1914, she became the first woman director of a scientific institution in South America. She also published a book about Amazonian birds that was 530 pages long. At least 5 animal species, including 2 bird species, have been named in her honor.
Lupita Nyong'o was an adult when she finally had the courage to admit she wanted to be an actor. She had a college degree and an office job, but she left that behind to fly back to Kenya for other opportunities and to plan for her future. Almost 6 years later, Lupita won her first Oscar. Lupita's parents had left their home in Kenya for political reasons, so Lupita was born in Mexico and given a Spanish name. Her family returned to Kenya when Lupita was about a year old, but she never forgot the country where she was born. When she was a teenager, Lupita lived in Mexico for a few months to learn Spanish. Today, she has both Kenyan and Mexican citizenship and speaks 4 languages: Lu, Spanish, English, and Swahili. Lupita was a star from the start of her career as an actor. She was nominated for a Golden Globe and won an Oscar for her first major role. She has starred in many more movies since then, but not all of Lupita's work happens in Hollywood. She also uses her influence to bring attention to issues that are close to her heart. She has even written a children's book about a young Kenyan girl named Solwe, who has the darkest skin in her family. Like Lupita, Solwe learns to see her own beauty and accept herself for who she is.
Thank you again to Rebel Girls. To learn more about Rebel Girls, visit rebelgirls.com.